teachers who walked out initially? You just wait for them to retire, or do they get trained in some way so that they could, as this model expands,
it's a really interesting
to get them?
One of the key failures of the open plans stuff that happened back in the 70s and 80s globally, really, was that there was no buy-in from the teachers because it was very much an imposed model. Because it was economic reasons that it was done, And they started off with some great kind of like concept schools in the UK, for example, and then they were replicated out at like sort of 2/3 the size, and in very cheap materials. And some of the big considerations were around noise, so acoustically they were appalling. Technologically, I mean, we've just moved on so far. So an open learning environment that reflects very much, your libraries and your sort of more social spaces and things that that people hang out in now for their learning, lends itself beautifully to mobile devices and things. And also, pedagogically things have shifted as well. There are schools that are sort of moving in this direction, and they're sort of saying to the teachers, right, which 3 teachers would like to come and work in this space?
Oh, I see. Just gradually, some are self-select.
We've got schools that are leaky, that have got asbestos damage or subsiding, and those schools are actually having to go through major changes. But as part of that, they are thinking, okay, what might a learning environment look like for these kids in 5 years, 10 years, and 30 years down the track? So moving towards much more of a collaborative sort of model of teaching and learning, which demands a lot from teachers in a different way and challenges some of those kind of quite deeply held concepts within teaching, around things like control and surveillance and power and kind of autonomy, and it's sort of you need to sort of work towards a reconceptualization of what that looks like.
Well, if you had to retrain a whole batch of teachers, I think your selection process was part of it, because those 60 had to look and reject it at first. So that was the first exposure. So it's then 2 years later, some of them are thinking, Christ, maybe I should have tried it. And so that's like those early adopter, late adopter type things.
And now when you see, I mean, we often get a lot of people coming in specifically to look at buildings and saying, can you look at these plans we've drawn, can you do that?
Buildings are nice, but it's what's inside the teacher's head.
And the space, we know the space kind of helps facilitate the change and helps facilitate the learning in this environment. But I've just started my master's actually about a month ago, because I'm really fascinated by the notion of collaboration how do you define collaboration in an open learning space like this?
You're doing a lot of that.
So I'm doing my thesis on...
let's have a YouTube moment.
Oh, no.
This is going to be the future. Okay. No, but that's basically the thesis idea, right? It's collaboration. It's not necessarily the space, right? It's the space in here.
So we know when we appoint teachers now, when we started, we were probably looking at appointing people on difference and what they could bring to the organisation. So, as that's gone over time, probably this time last year when we were looking for appointing, it was the ability to collaborate and an understanding, a deeper understanding of what that's like.
They might be a star in something, but if they didn't have the collaboration gene, they eventually
had to leave. Analysing what does collaboration actually, look like? I mean, on Andy Hargreaves talks about this kind of notion of sort of contrived collaboration when people are sort of shoved together, and is that really collaboration? And I don't think we've necessarily, a lot of the literature around collaboration looks at the relationship between a general education teacher and a special ed teacher, so more like a paraprofessional, or work within the inclusive schools, classroom kind of sector. And there's not a lot of research out there at the moment about what collaboration actually might look like in this kind of environment. And I think in terms of understanding more about collaboration, we need to turn into the business models of collaboration to actually start extracting the essence and the principles of collaboration, and to see to what extent they actually apply within an educational environment. Because it would be great to be able to sort of end up with some kind of continuum almost, some sort of...
People could self-select, this is where I need to move to, this is where I'm at.
So what are the stages that people go through, on that collaborative journey? And what are the mindsets and qualities that you actually need to bring to it? One of the things we say here is it's not about we go. Sorry, it's not about ego. It's we go. You know, it's actually
slogans can help.
And if you know, because if you've got one teacher that's got just such a massive ego in a collaborative space with 3 teachers, you're going to struggle. But there's also some norms and shared kind of ideas that people need to sort of agree on. And so we have those organisationally, but also at a hub level, there's a real need for that sort of storming and norming to go on. I mean, if one of you's really tidy, for example, one of you's incessantly tidy and the other 2 aren't, it's like that's really going to be a get up your nose. So we do talk about how you surface these kind of elephants that are growing in the room. We've done some work recently with Gay Greenwood from AUT around those hard to have conversations, those open to learning conversations, because traditionally in New Zealand that's learning you get exposed to when you get into middle management. You've got to now you've got to start having these conversations because you're now a leader or a manager. Whereas actually we realise in this kind of environment that you actually need to have those conversations. You've got ability and that capacity to have those conversations right from the get-go.
You probably missed it. Every Friday in the New Zealand Herald here, which is the biggest newspaper in the country, they have a business supplement. And last Friday of not last week, the week before, they had one of the problems they're getting into the IT industry. There's a great shortage of it. Really, one company was short of 71 people.
Wow!
But the biggest thing they were missing, the people those they got were all skilled in IT, but they weren't skilled in working together.
Right?
And that's because I'm lucky, having grown up on television. That's what you learn.
You can't do it.
Look at Peter Jackson's 11 Academy Awards in a night. They're all for costume design, for so and so, for script writing. So they were saying that was the biggest single thing that they were lacking. People have specialised too much in one thing. The idea of working together.
So it's an interesting thesis that you're bringing. You'd be studying this idea of how could principles, I guess,
collaboration really apply within this kind of setting, because it is a setting that people are moving into now.
So anyone taking an existing school could actually apply some of this to make transformation possible within existing teachers.
Because we know that there's that transitional phase, when schools are moving from traditional learning environments, for example, and traditional pedagogies and practice into more open learning spaces, and what does that transition look like? And I don't think, we're developing a clearer idea now about what that professional learning needs to look like in that transition. But up to now, perhaps we haven't had a particularly good idea. And as I said before, that's all a lot of work.
Well, you've done a lot of it here. You might mention to Steve, how you work together, how the kids work together.
Absolutely.
Some are working together. You saw two working together there, and the others are working together on a project.
I mean, one of the big things here. Generally on a Thursday or Friday is this notion of breakthrough. So you see one of the
little kids,
right. Had a breakthrough T-shirt on, and breakthrough is that idea of how much time do we spend working in a field or on something that we're passionate about, that we're good at, that we love doing. I mean, if you read like Ken Robinson's book about the element, it's a great inspiration. It's actually, how much time do we spend doing this? And as teachers,
it's a great book, isn't it?
It's fantastic,
fabulous book.
Or as kids, are kids rushing home to do what they love doing, or are they rushing to school to do what they love
That's
doing?
the ideal,
That's what you want. And it's that sort of. I'll check semi-high's idea of flow, and when you get in that stuff, in that moment, and you just got your head down, and suddenly somebody tells you, it's 4 o'clock, you've got to do such and such.
Especially when the principal can pronounce Chick Bench Alley.
But and so we'll have kind of breakthrough time, which it's a bit like Google time. Google or 3M that give their engineers 15-20% and then see a resultant sort of. Amount of innovation that comes out of that. So our kids can get that 15-20% time. So upstairs last week with year 5 to 8 kids, I'm trying to think what was going on. We had kids baking because they wanted to raise money for Red Cross, so they've got a muffin stand. We had kids on the field building bottle rockets out of Coke bottles and water, and they were trying to determine the relationship between the volume of water and air pressure before the thing took off.
Because if you have too much water, it won't go up.
That's right. And they were videoing it, and now they're trying to look at importing that video into the computer and using the timer element on the video editing suite to actually determine how much time it actually spent in the air and when it got to the top and how long it took, and therefore can they actually get a speed out of it. We had kids building Raspberry Pi
Which?
a Raspberry Pi computer.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen
I've
it?
never seen that.
Oh, let's show you the Raspberry Pi. It's
Raspberry
like a $50 computer. So we've got a couple of boys building that. We had some working. Oh, they're building a board game, but they planned their board game in Minecraft. They designed what it was going to look like in Minecraft. And there's always another Minecraft group.
These are all
There's always
examples of
another-
this 20% time. Right.
And it's,
right.
this is what the type of things that they're doing. So kids are,
Now, what I hear in your thesis or your master's work is that you can put in all these procedures and it won't work if you haven't changed the mindset of the teacher. And you're possibly at the end of your thesis, you're going to have this sort of training program for existing teachers. Is that what you're
I think you might end up with some sort of continuum of collaboration, and what are some of those things that you need to bring in order to start that, or to get it going, to keep it going,
right.
and to be able to innovate within that group of teachers.
For instance, in terms of schools that are now being built in Auckland and the area, say they look modelled partly